name is Sarabjeet. You guys are watching this in the Business Analyst in Demand Facebook group. The topic for today, what we'll be covering today, is the role of UAT for a business analyst. So this is a request that I got from a few folks. As you know, that I try to do live training at least twice a month now. I used to do it a lot more often, but I have launched paid training for 2 projects, so that takes away some of my time. So we do have free training in this group. So if you have topics that you'd like to get training on or would like me to talk about, post them in the group and I'm more than happy to cover them the next time that I am providing training. So today's topic is UAT, user acceptance testing, and what the role of a BA is in that duration. I'll be covering how to cover that in the waterfall scenario as well as agile. If you have questions, please feel free to stop me, and then we'll also have Q&A session towards the end. So if that sounds good, let's get started. I'm gonna share my screen with you guys. I did prepare some slides for you. So what is user acceptance testing, right? So user acceptance testing is typically once a development is done, we want our stakeholders to go in and test what we've done in a test environment before we put it into production, right? It's our way of knowing checks and balances to make sure that everything that our stakeholders wanted is working, and having our stakeholders play around with functionality before we put it into production is critical. So in all of my experience, in the vast number of years that I have experience in, we never have launched an IT system or a product before completing user acceptance testing. So this training is focused on what your role is going to be in the UAT phase. So first, I'll cover waterfall, right? Lots of companies are still using waterfall, so that's why I talk about waterfall a lot. A lot of companies are moving to agile. So what you'll see is lots of companies are strictly waterfall, strictly agile, and then I heard a new term today called Wagile, which is a mixture of waterfall and agile. I always knew that hybrid was going on, but that term was new to me. So that's what I learned earlier today. So in the waterfall, as we know, right, we start with planning, analysis, design, implementation, testing, integration, and maintenance. So where do test scripts and test cases come from? Anybody can take a guess? Where do they come from? How do we come up with test cases or test scripts that are used in UAT? Where do they come from?
From the requirements that we gather.
So
use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So our test cases and test scripts are what we use in UAT to test with, and those come directly from the requirements that we gather either in the analysis phase in waterfall or from our user stories that we're drafting and talking to our stakeholders or our product owners. That's directly where our test cases and test scripts come from. And typically in the waterfall scenario, we're working on them while our developers are coding. So in our waterfall, once we're done with analysis, which is when our requirements are complete, once our designs are completed, when our developers are busy coding, us as BAs should be creating test cases or test scripts, okay? And how do we create them, right? What is a test case or a test script? It's nothing more than a set of actions executed to verify that a particular feature or functionality in the software exists. So for example, if your, I have examples right here. So if your requirement is, you're working on screens for registration, right? And your requirements are around registration, your test scripts have to be centered around, you going to the site, you're entering the username and password, and you provide test data, what the expected results should be, and whether something passed or failed, right? Test cases and test scripts are used interchangeably. They are the same thing. And the format of test cases, I've given you guys an example. You want to talk about preconditions, right? So if you're talking about registration, you need to make sure that something that needs to happen before registration has been met before you can go in and execute that test script, right? Otherwise, obviously it's going to fail. And then you want to list what your post conditions need to be. So, which is your expected result. What should happen as a result? So provided that I'm testing a registration screen, if I provided the username and the password, I should get on like a screen that says, welcome to whatever scenario or the next page after that registration. So I'll pause right there to see if you guys have any questions on how do you create test cases or test scripts.
Hi, the question I've got is really around who we're supposed to create, because the organization I work for, we've got a testing team that will create the test cases. Occasionally I get asked to do that, but I just need to know whose remit is it.
So your QA teams will be creating their own test cases and test scripts, right? As a BA, you're probably going to be writing test cases or scripts for your users, right? And since they're not going to be as detailed as your QA folks will be doing them, your test cases or scripts are going to be from a user standpoint, right? So you're more focused in making sure that the requirements that your users have given you are ones that are being fulfilled when they're testing. Oftentimes, even in my day-to-day, I will create test scripts, but then I will also go to my stakeholders and say, you need to write down, they sometimes don't need to be in this format, but write down what is the expected results. How will you test that something works or doesn't work? Does that make sense? So entirely, your QA teams will be writing their own separate things. What you need to do as a business analyst is focus most on business functionality from a user standpoint. And you can go to your stakeholders as well and say, what are you most interested in knowing? What steps will you need to follow to make sure that you're getting to the expected result? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on. So once you have your test scripts, I think we have another question. The whole row is test case, right? Not sure, Jude, what do you mean? This one? Yeah. So this is one test script. So check customer login with valid data, check customer login with invalid data. So oftentimes when we're writing test scripts, we want to have like positive results and then also negative, because you want to make sure that the functionality is working, right? You want to make sure that they're not just putting in anything and then you're going to the next screens. So both of these are two different test scripts. That's right. Okay, so then once you create these test scripts and test cases, what do you do with them? And as BAs, we do something called create a requirements traceability matrix. And the goal of a requirements traceability matrix is you have your, in the waterfall, you have your BRD, you match that to your functional requirements, and then you match that with test results. The whole purpose of having a requirements traceability matrix is to make sure that you guys are keeping track of all the requirements that you gathered upfront with your stakeholders, and that you're mapping them to the functionality that we're delivering. So it's to make sure it's a final check for BAs to know, hey, we gathered 10 requirements. We may have 30 test scripts, but all of these 30 test scripts map to those 10 requirements we gathered in the beginning of the project. Okay. And then at the testing phase, this is where your stakeholders will go in and be conducting UAT, right? And the goal of UAT is let your end users test the functionality based on test scripts that you may have created, or giving them the ability to play around with the tool and make sure that it's what they're expecting, right? From a business standpoint, if they wanted to build a new report, go in and have them play around with the functionality to make sure that what they had expected is something that you're delivering. And the process of UAT is typically when you're working in a waterfall scenario, you know the timeframes for testing. So your role as a BA, you want to make sure that you're communicating timeframes for testing. Testing is typically 1 to 2 weeks long, depending on the size and complexity of your project. You want to make sure that you're communicating with your stakeholders the scheduled time of UAT, that you're providing your stakeholders the test scripts that they need to execute, right? And that you're available during UAT, because as a business analyst, you're probably more closer to the functionality, right? You've been working with your developers, you've been working with your QA folks. So at this point, you know the functionality a lot better. So in case they have questions, you need to make sure that you're available and you're communicating your availability, your phone number, because we're in COVID situation, how they can reach out to you if they have questions about the functionality. when they're reporting bugs or defects, you need to report, test out and make sure that they're valid bugs, right? Sometimes that we do see user issues. If there are valid bugs, then you report to them to the project team, your PM, QA, or dev team. And then once you have bugs, you're gonna work with your business owners to prioritize bugs. I've been on projects where we've had 20 bugs, and then what you want to do is you need to prioritize and figure out which bugs are the most critical bugs or defects where you want your dev and QA folks to focus most of their attention on. We've had projects where we've launched with bugs. They're known defects and they've been communicated, the business teams, everybody's okay with moving forward with those if they're small minor defects, but obviously if they're critical bugs, we have to fix them before we launch. So that's why prioritization during UAT of bugs is really, really important, you guys. And then as a BA, you need to provide daily status of testing. So something like 80% of test scripts have been executed and we have 0 bugs. So just so that everybody on the project team is aware of what you're doing and how far along we are. And then for the bugs that are identified, so for example, let's say if we have out of the 20 defects, we have 2 critical bugs, you're working with your QA and dev folks to get them fixed. Once they tell you, hey, Gervan, your bugs have been fixed, you need to communicate to your stakeholders and have them retest. So it's, so it's a linear process that you're following in getting those bugs fixed during UAT. So I'll pause there and I'll get a sip of water and let me know if you guys have questions on this process. Okay, so that was, so what's next? Once your UAT and your QA teams are done testing and all the critical bugs, and I highlight critical and high priority bugs, have been fixed, we typically have a release schedule on the project plan. Everybody knows what that release schedule is going to be. Typically, we do cutovers after hours. Sometimes I've seen, Friday 9 p.m. in my current projects, we start cutover at 11 p.m. on any given day because that's when the number of users are less, are very less in the system. After we do cutover, we have our QA and our subject matter experts or our stakeholders go into the production environment after we've cut over to do, customer validation or customer validation testing. So this is while we're cutting over in the middle of the night, very, very early mornings around 5 o'clock, or, as soon as we're done with cutover, we'll have our stakeholders go into our live systems now where our code is in production to go ahead and test and give us feedback and make sure that everything looks okay. And then if no bugs are found at that point, then the release is considered successful. I've been in situations where we have our customers go test at 5 a.m. and they find something critical. Again, you have to figure out if it's high priority enough where you hold the release or you roll back. In the situation, if it's a really critical bug, then you do something called a rollback of code, which is going back to previous, right? If it's not as critical, then you move forward with the production, right? It's considered successful, but then you keep working on the bug until it is fixed. And then the first working day, you keep in touch with their subject matter experts to make sure that all is going well. As BAs, we're typically conducting training or coordinating training efforts to make sure that your stakeholders have the training that they need to be successful in the system. So I've covered a lot more than UAT. Any questions? It is. We'll cover Agile next. I'm losing my breath. Any questions on the waterfall? Okay. I've been talking for 2 hours prior to this, so I'm losing my voice at this point. Okay, now let's cover Agile. And with Agile, I try to find an image on Google that was similar to our waterfall, which is right here. In waterfall, we have typically 6 to 8 phases, depending on the organization that you're in. And in Agile, it is an iterative process, right? Oops, hold on. It is an iterative process, meaning that We do smaller releases. So we're not trying to plan and gather requirements for everything. We're only focused on what we're doing in that sprint. And that may be very small bits and pieces of functionality. So you plan, you design, you develop, you test, you release, you gather feedback, and the process continues over and over again. Okay. And so what does user acceptance testing look like in the Agile environment? The way that it's different is that with every user story that you're writing the acceptance criteria with it. A user story is not complete unless you're providing the acceptance criteria, right? And that's where it's a little different than Waterfall, because in Waterfall, you're gathering like, let's say 30 requirements, you're going through the design, and then you're writing your test scripts, right? But in Agile, you're defining your user stories with the acceptance criteria. So it's very, very clear on what the expected result needs to be to the product owner or the stakeholders that you're working with. And so therefore, after you've created your acceptance criteria and handed it over, you're still working on your test cases or test scripts, which are going to be a little bit more detailed than your acceptance criteria, right? It's going to have test data and expected results and such, but it's the same concept of what we did in Waterfall. You're still going through the motions and creating this this test log, so that when you're done, when your developers and QA folks say we're done with testing, you can go in and execute these test scripts, and you can have your stakeholders and PO also do the same thing. Okay. And then again, this is the same process in a UAT environment, where I said in the Waterfall, UAT may last 1 to 2 weeks. With the Agile environment, UAT may last a couple of hours, may last half a day or a full day, to let the stakeholders and the PO go in and test that small piece of functionality that was the goal of the sprint, right? But you're going through the same motions, right? If there's a bug, you need to work with your product owner and make sure that it's something that isn't critical enough for us to release. There are always, at times we do release with known bugs, and that's pretty common in our industry. Okay. And then what's next is the same thing. You, depending on if it's a sprint that has a release, not all sprints go into a major release, but some do. So depending on what the situation is, we may capture like 5 or 6 different sprints and then schedule a release. So depending if it's a release, then you'll follow the typical offline rule when you're releasing new code into the system when there's not a lot of users on the system, and then rollbacks if you're having critical bugs at that point. And then that's it. Questions for me, you guys?
Yeah, hi Sarabjit, Rajeshwari here. I have a question. So when you said in Agile, we have the UAT for, coming in this for every sprint based on whether the release is scheduled or not.
Yeah.
So when you are doing the UAT, does the UAT come in the part of the sprint that we are scheduled for a 2-week, 3-week or 4-week cycle, or it is after the sprint is done, then we do the UAT?
No, UAT has to be part of your sprint, because how can you call a sprint complete until we have user acceptance testing? So if we have a 2-week sprint, typically the last day of the sprint or the day before, typically as things are getting done, we'll reach out to our stakeholders, right? So it's not a set day in Agile. So let's say we have in a given sprint, we're working on 10 user stories. As those 10 user stories are being developed and our QA folks are done testing them, at that point, we could reach out to our stakeholders and PO and say, hey, can you validate this? But usually at the last day of the sprint, we have something called a demo where we present all that functionality. Our developers are there, our QA folks are there, and they're showing our customers, right, or our PO or stakeholders the demo. And at that demo, before the demo, our stakeholders typically have had a chance to do UAT. But at the demo, we do a little bit of end-to-end. Let's say if there's 10 user stories, we're going to demo all 10 of them. So UAT has to be done before the sprint is over.
Okay. And also one more thing. So when there is a feature enhancement after the release, when a feature enhancement comes into the picture, then how do we handle that in Waterfall and Agile? Even though it is a small feature, yes, it has to be tested. but then even UAT also will be done at that point, or they just
Yes.
go with the testing?
Yeah, UAT has to be done anytime you release any software into production, whether it's enhancement, whether it's, you know, a new functionality, like a brand new functionality. What is the role of focus group in UAT? What do you mean by focus group? Do you mean by like a group of stakeholders?
Yeah, group of stakeholders, Sarabji. Yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on what their role in the system is. So you can have, typically on large scale projects, you can have different stakeholders testing different pieces of the functionality. So if that group of the focus group is only, you know, concerned with, let's say, accounting, you can only have them focus on accounting. But then as a business analyst, you want to make sure that even though people are looking at, like, different stakeholders are looking at the different bits and pieces of functionality, you want to have something called end-to-end testing. Meaning what you could do is coordinate, okay, if the accounting folks do something and it's supposed to trigger something for the marketing teams, you want to coordinate that with the different groups of users so you can test the system end to end. Does that help? Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. So the focus group means here all the different users basically who are assigned for testing different things, you mean?
So when I think of a focus group, it's a group that is let's say all people from accounting. Like, let's say they pick 5 people who are going to be our subject matter experts from accounting. To me, that's a focus group because they're all centered around accounting. What do you mean when you say focus group? Are you thinking that they're stakeholders from different areas?
Yeah, so focus
Okay.
group, yeah, I thought it would be like people from different areas, basically like accounting, finance.
Okay, so they're just like your stakeholders. They're no different than your stakeholders who would be testing, you know, their pieces of functionality in the system.
So during when people do the UAT, like as a BA, when you do the UAT, you assign all those stakeholders to do the
Yes.
testing?
Yes.
Okay.
So typically the people that you work with to gather the requirements will be the same folks that that will run through these test scripts for you.
Okay, yeah, understood now. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more question. So sometimes when we are doing the testing, sometimes it is thrown to the public also, you know, when they're building a new system, sometimes they, you know, we can call it as focus groups also. Sometimes, you know, these people, they have a group of users to come and test their product or their system, how it is from the end user standpoint.
Yeah.
So this would be also, will it be like how it is going to be like, you know, the UAT done with the business users first and then it goes to the public, or it would be, you know, public first and then the business users?
No, typically internal first and then external. Because you'll find lots of bugs, you know, internally you don't want to put out to the world. So first, as a business analyst, you should be running through the test scripts and make sure that it's ready for the business. Then you have your stakeholders, internal stakeholders test. And when everything looks good, then you go on to your external stakeholders.
Okay.
And then in our projects, what we do is when we do have external stakeholders and internal, the night of cutover, right? So let's say in my projects, we start cutover at 11 p.m. At 5 a.m. is when our internal stakeholders will go in and start testing. And at 6 a.m. we'll have like a few external stakeholders that will go into the system and start testing. And then by 7 o'clock, we have a go, no go decision typically, where we, you know, have our executive teams come on, executive teams from the business, from IT, and we report if there are any critical bugs. We talk about what the impacts are if we have critical bugs to them, and then the executive teams make a decision whether it's a go or a no-go decision. And if it's a no-go, it's a rollback. We continue working on the defect. And if it is a go, but continue working on the defects, that's also a possibility where we may have some bugs, but we're going to release the software to everybody, and then we're going to continue working on those bugs.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you guys, I think we're up at time. I'll take one last question if there is any.
I just have a question. Will the users be informed that there will be certain bugs before they start using the software or app or whatever it is?
If it's like customer facing bugs, then yes, we will announce those. Okay. All right, guys, this was great. As I mentioned before, we do have live training in the group. Most of the time I need topics. So if you guys have topics, post them in the group and I'm more than happy to cover them in one of our sessions. Our trainings are usually on Sundays. This Sunday is Mother's Day. So we've shifted to Saturdays, which I'm grateful for you guys to be flexible with me on the scheduling front. I'm here to support you. This group is dedicated in helping you guys succeed into the business analyst role. What we've covered today is a small snippet of my paid training. So if you guys are looking for training that gives you more of a hands-on approach, I provide that training. So feel free to reach out to me if you are interested in paid training. And then otherwise, there's lots of resources in this group already. There's lots of past training. I have a YouTube channel, which I load the training that we do in this group, which is easier to find. So please, go through the materials and let me know how I can help you. Okay. All right, guys. It was good. Thank you. I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot.
Yep. Bye.